Walter Thompson, a retired financier in his late 70s, sat in his sleek black Cadillac, the summer heat of rural Tennessee pressing against the windows despite the air conditioner's hum. His tailored suit felt out of place on this dusty back road, far from his sprawling estate in Franklin. A flat tire had left him stranded, and with no cell signal to call for help, frustration gnawed at him. Walter was a man accustomed to control. Decades of boardroom victories had ensured that, but today, the universe seemed to have other plans. As he tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, a figure appeared in the distance, small but purposeful, walking toward him under the blazing sun. What happened next would unravel everything he thought he knew about life, wealth, and human connection. The figure was a boy, no older than 14, dressed in a faded blue t-shirt and scuffed sneakers. His name was Caleb, though Walter wouldn't learn that until later. The boy's dark eyes scanned the car with a quiet intensity before settling on Walter. "Got a flat, sir?" he asked, his voice steady but polite. Walter nodded, caught off guard by the boy's directness. "Yeah, and no signal to call for help. I'm stuck." Caleb knelt beside the tire without hesitation. "I can fix that. My dad taught me how last year. Got a spare?" Walter pointed to the trunk, watching as Caleb retrieved the tools with practiced ease. The boy worked quickly, his hands moving with a confidence that belied his age. Walter stood by, feeling an unfamiliar humility creep in. Here was a kid, probably with little to his name, solving a problem Walter couldn't. When Caleb finished, wiping his hands on his jeans, Walter reached for his wallet. "Here, take this," he said, holding out a crisp $50 bill. "You earned it." But Caleb stepped back, raising a hand. "Thanks, sir, but I'm good. Just glad I could help." Walter froze, the money dangling awkwardly in his hand. Who turns down cash? He thought. The boy's refusal wasn't just surprising, was unsettling. Caleb gave a small nod and started walking away, his figure shrinking against the horizon. Walter climbed back into his car, but the encounter lingered, a puzzle he couldn't solve. Why would someone help a stranger for nothing? That night, in the silence of his opulent home, Walter couldn't shake the image of Caleb's quiet smile. His mansion, with its marble floors and imported furniture, felt hollow. Dinner, a perfectly seared ribeye, sat untouched on the dining table. Walter had spent his life chasing wealth, closing deals, and outsmarting rivals. Every interaction had a price, a motive. Yet this boy, with his worn clothes and dusty hands, had given freely, expecting nothing. It defied everything Walter knew. As he sipped his bourbon, a question gnawed at him. What kind of person raises a kid like that? By morning, he was determined to find out. Walter drove back to the same stretch of road, scanning for any sign of Caleb. He stopped at gas stations and diners, describing the boy to anyone who would listen. Most shrugged, but at a small coffee shop, an older woman behind the counter paused. "Sounds like Caleb Miller," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mom in Shelbyville." Walter thanked her and headed to Shelbyville, a quiet town nestled in the rolling hills of Middle Tennessee. The drive gave him time to think. What was he even doing? Was it gratitude, guilt, or something else pulling him back? In Shelbyville, Walter found Caleb's homey, a modest, weathered house with a sagging porch and a patchy lawn. He knocked, and a woman in her early 40s answered. Her name was Diane, Caleb's mother, and her tired eyes softened when Walter mentioned the flat tire. "That sounds like my boy," she said with a smile. "He's always lending a hand," Walter explained. He wanted to thank Caleb properly, and Diane invited him in. The house was simple but warm, with faded furniture and walls adorned with family photos. It was a stark contrast to Walter's sterile mansion, yet it felt alive, filled with stories. Caleb was in the backyard, hammering nails into a rickety fence. He looked up, surprised. "Hey, mister, what are you doing here?" Walter smiled, feeling oddly nervous. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. You helped me when you didn't have to." Caleb shrugged, his expression easy. No big deal. But to Walter, it was. Over lunch, homemade cornbread and collard greens, Walter listened as Diane and Caleb talked about their lives. Diane worked long hours at a local factory, and Caleb dreamed of becoming an architect, sketching buildings in a worn notebook. Their stories were laced with resilience, but also hints of struggle: medical bills, a leaking roof, a community fraying under economic strain. Walter saw the cracks in their world, the kind of injustice that grinds people down, yet they carried on with quiet dignity. As he drove home, Walter's mind raced. He thought of his childhood, scraping by in a house not unlike Caleb's. Somewhere along the way, he'd traded those roots for wealth, losing sight of what mattered. Now, Caleb's selflessness had cracked open something inside him. This wasn't about charity, it was about justice, about righting a balance. The next day, Walter made calls. He rallied contractors, old business contacts, and suppliers. Within a week, a crew descended on Caleb's house, unloading lumber and tools. Diane stood on the porch, stunned. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice trembling. Walter shook his head. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed. Let me give back." The renovation was a whirlwind. The porch was rebuilt, the roof patched, and the interior transformed with fresh paint and new appliances. Caleb watched the workers, his eyes bright with curiosity. One contractor, a gruff man named Tom, noticed and handed him a measuring tape. "Want to learn?" he asked. Caleb dove in, asking questions about beams and blueprints. Walter watched from a distance, a warmth spreading in his chest. This was more than a house site, was a chance for Caleb to dream bigger. But not everyone saw it that way. Some neighbors whispered, skeptical of Walter's motives. Was he buying goodwill? Pitying a poor family? The murmurs stirred tension, a reminder of how easily kindness can be twisted in a world quick to judge. Walter ignored the gossip, but it sparked a question. Why is it so hard for people to accept pure intentions? He pushed forward, determined to prove them wrong. Weeks later, the house was unrecognizably a sturdy, vibrant home that radiated hope. On the final day, neighbors gathered, bringing pies and casseroles. Caleb raced around, showing his friends the new swing set in the backyard. Diane pulled Walter aside, tears in her eyes. "This isn't just a house," she said. "It's a future." Walter nodded, his throat tight. "You showed me what life should be, about connection, not competition. I'm the one who owes you." As the sun set, Caleb joined them on the porch. "Mr. Walter," he said, "I want to do what you did, help people, make things better." Walter placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already are, Caleb. Your heart started this." They sat together, watching the sky fade to dusk, a quiet bond tying them. Walter knew this wasn't the end. He'd arranged for Caleb to apprentice with Tom, nurturing his passion for architecture. For Walter, Shelbyville was no longer just a dot on a map, it was home. Months later, Caleb's sketches filled notebooks, each one bolder than the last. Walter visited often, no longer the outsider. Their story rippled through the town, challenging people to rethink kindness in a world often marred by violence and inequity. Some saw it as a beacon of hope. Others questioned if one act could truly change a broken system. But for Walter, Caleb, and Diane, the answer was clear. It could start. What do you think? Can one act of kindness overcome the violence and injustice we see today? Or is it just a drop in the bucket? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's hear your stance.